Hey, everybody. Welcome to the briefing room on this Monday. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us, joined with our White House reporter, Jordan Phelps. A lot to get into today, including the continued fallout from the big development yesterday with the delivery of Attorney General Bill Barr's summary of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's 22-month investigation. By now, you, of course, have heard the major conclusions there. No conspiracy from the Trump campaign and the Russians. There's a picture of the letter. And, of course, a more nuanced finding on the obstruction of justice question. The special counsel concluding he can't make a determination on that question, which is something that Congress is going to dig into. But after the president has been swinging at Robert Mueller for months, calling him a disgraceful person, the leader of a Democratic witch hunt, just a few moments ago in the Oval Office, the president saying quite a different tune when our John Carl asked him what he thinks of Bob Mueller now. Take a listen.
Lasted a long time. We're glad it's over. It's 100% the way it should have been. I wish it could have gone a lot sooner, a lot quicker. There are a lot of people out there that have done some very, very evil things, very bad things, I would say treasonous things against our country. We can never, ever let this happen to another president again. Up to the Attorney General. Wouldn't bother me at all.
All right, an honorable man, Jordan, the president says Bob Mueller is, and this is someone who we expect in the days ahead, the next steps here will be potentially to hear from Bob Mueller and Bill Barr.
Yeah, absolutely. We know that Capitol Hill might want to call him up. We know that Bob Mueller is still working with the DOJ now in these final steps as they're closing up shop there. But, Devin, I've got to tell you, at the White House, the mood has just been jubilation. This is a really good moment for this White House. And we even outside the White House saw Sarah Sanders and Kellyanne Conway embrace in front of reporters. So they are really running with this moment.
It does seem that a lot of our viewers, a lot of Americans are still sort of trying to digest what this means next. Our Erica King was out on the National Mall here talking with people visiting Washington from across the country during these historic times, wanting to know what's on their mind, what questions they have. And here's what we heard from one person, Eric Jordan of Maryland. Take a listen.
I'd like to know, now that Attorney General William Barr has decided not to prosecute the president for any crimes, what recourse does Congress have as far as special investigations to look into the president's possible illegal activities?
All right, let's bring in our Capitol Hill reporter, Catherine Falders. Catherine, pick up that question. Eric Jordan wants to know what Congress is going to do next.
Yes, so we're still on the question of what they do as it relates to Barr and Mueller. As Jordan mentioned, Democrats up here want to call them up here to testify. So that's what's next, Devin, as it relates to that. But Democrats are going to seize on multiple other investigations, too. We already know that the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Nadler, he has 81 letters sent to various Trump officials, to the White House, to the Trump Organization, as it relates to Russia. They're probing that. And just to name a few, really, the president's contacts with Russia. There's questions about the Trump Organization. There's questions about those hush money payments that we've been talking about. And also the president's tax returns are going to be a big thing on the Democrats' agenda. So even though this investigation is over, Mueller had a narrow scope. Congress has already said they're going to probe all of these things. I just named a few of them there. There's a laundry list. So these investigations are still going to continue up here on Capitol Hill, and not to mention other U.S. attorneys' offices.
And Catherine, they're also promising, or at least Democrats are, to investigate the investigation. They want to know from Robert Mueller why he chose not to go any further on the question of obstruction.
Yeah, they do. And the big question Democrats have up here is Mueller didn't make that determination, but Bill Barr did. They want to know why Barr came to that conclusion, why the Trump-appointed Barr and Rosenstein took that determination from, as Nadler says, 2 years of work that Mueller has done, and he made that determination in 2 days. They are absolutely looking into that, and they're going to continue. We're going to continue to hear that from them up here, Devin.
All right, Catherine Falders for us on the Hill. Thanks so much. And, of course, the president today, as we have said at the beginning, Jordan, taking a victory lap on this. You know, very quickly here, this will be a campaign rally going forward, and we are kicking into campaign season with a campaign rally on Thursday night.
Yeah, and we expect the president to be ripping into this. And one thing that's going to be tricky politics for the Democrats now is as they continue to want to probe into all of these matters, the White House is now armed with this political argument that we've already been here and we've been vindicated. So this is going to be tricky territory for both sides going forward.
All right, moving on. The president himself pivoting back to foreign policy, matters of substance and policy today at the White House, hosting the Israeli prime minister just 2 weeks before a major election there, the toughest re-election battle for Bibi Netanyahu in his storied career in Israel. And I want to go now bring into the conversation Jordana Mueller. She's ABC News correspondent coming to us live from Jerusalem, where on the eve of Netanyahu's visit to Washington here, Jordana, there have been a series of rocket attacks taking place from Gaza into Israel, and I understand some counterattacks are underway right now.
That's right. This was really supposed to be Benjamin Netanyahu's moment in front of the White House with the president, what he thought would boost his very troubled re-election campaign. He's down in the polls. He's dogged by corruption allegations, and all of a sudden, rocket fire coming from the Gaza Strip, really casting a shadow over his visit. That rocket hitting deep inside Israel, a home, destroying it, injuring 7 people. And just a few hours ago, Israel carrying out airstrikes across the Gaza Strip, hitting mostly Hamas targets, including a military and security headquarters. And recently, just in the half-hour, news that Israel has destroyed the offices of Ismail Haniyeh. Now, that is the political leader of the Hamas movement, the Islamist group that rules the Gaza Strip. He was not inside. He is in hiding, but this certainly a big hit and sending a message to the group. Now, in response, already militant groups have been firing rockets on southern Israel, sirens going off in just the last 30 minutes, a number of those being intercepted by the Iron Dome. Israeli residents essentially staying close to their safe rooms and bomb shelters, and it's still unclear at this moment whether where this will go. We know that Egyptian and UN mediators are working hard to pull both sides back from a bigger escalation. We're going to have to wait and see what happens in the hours ahead.
Yeah, a dangerous, if familiar, situation taking place right now, and certainly an opportune time for Netanyahu facing re-election battle to come here to show solidarity with President Trump and return the favor. And I've got to say, Jordan Phelps, this has been certainly a bromance on full display today. In fact, let's take a listen to the president with Bibi Netanyahu just a short time ago in the Oval Office. They sounded like they were best buddies.
Under my administration, the unbreakable alliance between the United States and Israel has never been stronger. You read things, you hear things. It's never been stronger. Just remember that.
You have shown consistently incredible support for Israel, for our right to self-defense. When we exercise that self-defense, you have never flinched. You've always been there.
And the president, as part of this visit, signing a proclamation, Jordan Phelps, recognizing Israel's occupation of the Golan Heights, which is a territory that's been very controversial. The United States has not taken a position in 50 years on that, and they did in this administration. It does seem like the president, with this move, the embassy move, and pulling out of the Iran deal and the like, really seems to be cranking towards the most Israel-friendly policies of a generation.
Absolutely. This is domestic politics for the president as much as anything. He knows that this plays to his evangelical base to be close to Israel. And these two leaders have become dubbed political twins on the international stage because of their closeness, because of their similarities in styles. And you saw even there today, both men were wearing red ties. Last time Bibi was at the White House, remember, they both were wearing blue. I'm sure just a coincidence, but it does highlight just the similarities between these two men. And they're certainly hoping to drive that message home ahead of Netanyahu's very critical election in just 2 weeks, which is important for Netanyahu, but also for President Trump as he continues to want to exude strength in the region.
And Jordana Mueller, as so many Americans here are familiar with the numerous tried and failed attempts over the years to broker a Mideast peace. We know that this administration has been making a renewed push towards that. Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, son-in-law spearheading that effort. He told me at a dinner just a couple weeks ago that he plans to unveil his proposal for peace in April, so stay tuned for that. But I'm wondering, from your vantage point in Jerusalem, what impact does this Golan Heights recognition have? Is that going to make this peace process, this peace settlement, even harder?
Well, I think what it does is for any future peace negotiations between Israel and Syria, it essentially takes the Golan Heights off the table. And remember, there were previous Israeli governments that began negotiations to return part of the Golan Heights in exchange for peace. But what the American president, Donald Trump has done essentially is to take it off the table and say that if there's going to be peace negotiations, well, the Golan Heights is now already in Israel's territory. It's already their claims of sovereignty are something we stand behind. And when you think about it, the Americans are the most influential Mideast peace partners, mediators, we could say. So this is really a major step and a blow, really, to the Arab states, especially Syria, which is obviously rejecting this and calling it a violation of international law.
Yeah, it's certainly going to, I would imagine, at the very least, complicate peace talks between Israel and Syria, the United States, the Palestinians, and the whole like. But we shall see when that Jared Kushner brokered plan comes out later next month. Jordana Miller for us in Jerusalem. Thank you so much, Jordana and Jordan. Just to button that up, you've been doing some reporting on this with the Kushner team. They have been spending a lot of capital on this peace plan. The president has talked a lot about, with Bibi Netanyahu, this being perhaps a signature of his foreign policy. And yet, time and again, it does seem they seem to take steps that would undermine their own efforts here.
Yeah, absolutely, Devin. And part of Bibi's election, this peace plan is sort of hinging on that, these plans to kind of roll this out in April. But what I'm hearing from administration officials is they hope to really take a different approach with this peace plan. Only a very small group of people within the administration have even seen the complete draft. And there's going to be a huge economic component to this to try to really develop the economy for the Palestinian people as sort of a big carrot to come along with making some pretty big compromises, which, as you note, they've already taken off the table. Jerusalem, Golan Heights, they're just no longer under negotiation.
It's going to be fascinating. We know that Bibi Netanyahu's visit here to Washington continues tomorrow, so much more on that ahead. Meanwhile, turn now to 2020 politics and the race for president to challenge President Donald Trump. We're joined by our political reporter, Johnny Verhoeven, here to dig into this, Johnny. And I wanted to start with someone who many of us considered to be sort of a long shot at the beginning of this process, Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana. He's having sort of a moment right now, and I think we need to take note of it.
No, I think you're right. He obviously was someone who came onto the scene and was not very well known. He's the 37-year-old mayor of South Bend, Indiana. He definitely is having a moment. His campaign announced earlier this month that he has enough individual donors to make the first Democratic debate. He's raising a lot of money. He got a very warm reception in South Carolina over the weekend. He's traveling all over the country. And this is before he's officially even announced his candidacy. He's still in the exploratory phase. So you can expect also to get another bump in interest when he officially announces. And he's pitching himself as kind of a pragmatist, someone who's been the leader of a city, who comes from the Midwest and can kind of appeal to a broader base of the electorate, and isn't pitching himself as kind of a radical progressive. He's more pitching himself as a problem solver, someone who can kind of just get things done and go straight down the middle.
He would also be the first ever millennial president,
right,
one of the youngest presidents, and first openly gay president. He is someone who we've had here in the briefing room for a conversation. For a little more on Pete Buttigieg, here's a little bit of that conversation just about a couple of months or so ago, where we asked him just what experience he has as the mayor of a very small town. Take a listen. You'd not only be the youngest president ever elected, you'd also be the first mayor since 1812. How has that experience prepared you to be president?
Well, I think it's exactly the kind of experience we need more of. First of all, executive experience. I think it shows right now that we have a president with no government experience coming into it, a vice president with actually fewer years of executive experience than I have. And when you run a city of any size, I think you understand the responsibilities of executive leadership. South Bend is a city like many in the the industrial Midwest that faced brutal economic challenges. At the beginning of this decade, Newsweek wrote that we were a dying city. Now we're growing again. We're seeing our downtown come back to life. We've created jobs in new industries and really transformed our economy. And I think it's a message that's very different from the story we're being told by this White House when it comes to industrial parts of the country, which is that we're supposed to look backward. There is no going back. There's no again in an honest politics. We can't keep looking for greatness in all the wrong places. And I think my experience as mayor shows that.
So he's playing up the mayoral experience, Johnny. How's it playing in Iowa? What do we know about that critical first state?
Right. Well, you've seen kind of a whole host of candidates obviously descend on the early state of Iowa. He got a very warm reception in Iowa, too. He's been there, I think, twice now. His first trip to South Carolina was this past weekend. But you saw a ton of candidates there last weekend. You saw Beto O'Rourke, who now officially announced his candidacy. Kirsten Gillibrand was there. Cory Booker. And so I think, and I was actually there last week, and the people that I spoke to obviously said it's very early, but they're also very encouraged to see someone like Buttigieg, who's 37, like you said, a millennial, and they really like the fact that he was bringing just a new perspective to the race that hasn't really ever been seen before.
He's leaning pretty heavily on those Midwest roots.
And he will
very
throughout
nearby.
his entire campaign.
Exactly. You know, it does seem interesting that there's not a lot of polling out there right now, at least airworthy polling that we can talk to you about in Iowa. It's still a little bit too early for that. Yeah. But there is a lot of rumbling around the edges that somebody like Buttigieg is inching his way into that, perhaps that upper tier of candidates, the big names we're all familiar with. What's interesting is the biggest name of all, Joe Biden, former vice president. We don't have any clear indication, definitive indication yet.
Right.
What's the latest that you're hearing, Jordan? I know you used to stake out Joe Biden's compound just up the way in Delaware.
Famously. But Biden is still a big question mark. We don't know what he's going to do. He's hinted at it once now, but we don't know. There's been some reporting that he might consider pledging to just do one term. He might announce his VP pick early on, some different kind of ploys to get some steam. But your guess is as good as mine.
It seemed like possibly some trial balloons here as he sort of games us out. The last I think we heard from him, he said he was about 95% toward making a decision.
And you can tell, well, you can tell as you're out on sort of on the trail with other candidates, you can tell the field is kind of holding their breath for Biden to get in the race. And you can tell that he's definitely going through his own consideration process, thinking about, will I have the fundraising operation? Will I have the social media operation to really break through in this candidacy? And I think one interesting thing to point out was that comment that he made about having the most progressive record of anyone. He said running, and then he walked it back a little bit. But I think that's setting up what's going to be a really interesting debate throughout this entire primary, which is, what does that term progressive mean in today's Democratic Party? And does Joe Biden's record reflect what voters want to hear?
And we will wait on Joe Biden, but you know, it's one of the things that's interesting to go back to Pete Buttigieg is you don't hear the president talk about Mayor Pete just yet, Jordan. He's mentioned Bernie Sanders, perhaps Joe Biden.
Yes,
He's been some of his aides talk about O'Rourke. He talks a little bit about Kamala Harris. What are you hearing about how they are beginning to size up this Democratic field?
Well, one thing we know is the president has said a few people he'd love to run against. He's named O'Rourke, Biden, Sanders, but there are some he hasn't spoken out on. He said that he wants to save his attacks for later. So I almost wonder if the ones he's most worried about are those that he's not talking about.
Right, and we've seen that time and again with other Democratic leaders in this town, the people he doesn't attack, sometimes an indication of people he has the most respect for.
I'll be very curious to see if he mentions anyone by name at his campaign rally. I think that would be a clear indication that he's either a little bit more worried or kind of wants to define them very early on in this process.
Before we wrap up today here in the briefing room, we should talk a little bit about that campaign rally and also how go full circle here, how the Mueller report is impacting the campaign for 2020, how it will going forward. Love to get your take on that, Johnny and Jordan. The president will be back officially in re-election campaign mode on Thursday, his first rally since the Mueller report. He'll be in Michigan. Expect this will come up, no doubt, if not be the entirety of the speech. Right. What are Democrats saying about the report?
Well, it's been really interesting to gauge their reaction in the wake of this. And what's interesting to note is that a lot of their attention now, a lot of the top contenders' attention now is turned directly to Attorney General Bill Barr. And they say, look, this 4-page summary is not sufficient. We need the entire report if we're actually going to pass a judgment on whether or not we can really say definitively that the president did not have any improper contacts with Russia during the campaign. Kamala Harris has come out and said that. Bernie Sanders has. Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker have all pointed out the fact that Attorney General William Barr is a partisan official. He was appointed by President Trump, approved by the Senate, but none of the 2020 contenders voted to confirm Bill Barr. So their whole point is, look, if this was an independent process, let's get the entire report, let the American public see that report, and then pass a judgment. But Jordan was talking about this earlier. They are in a bit of a quandary here, because there are some of them that did go out a little bit further and say, there was improper collusion or whatever. But they're in a bit of a tough spot now politically with this whole report.
No doubt. There's obviously a risk to them focusing too much on this going into 2020. You might advise them to focus on their own issues instead. But the president, on the other side, is playing this in a really smart fashion. He's saying that he doesn't mind if it'd be out in the public, but it's completely up to his attorney general. Now, in truth, we all know that the president could make an order to have the report released. He hasn't expressed that willingness yet. But at this point, he can kind of punt it over to the DOJ and say that he's good with it.
It's a really important point that it does give Trump an upper hand that he has not had before in this political debate. It's very
certainly very significant turn of events for him and his presidency in the past 24 hours. This campaign has been reshaped as well. Perhaps we'll be talking a little bit more about policy, different policy proposals ahead as well. It should be an interesting debate. Great to have Jordan Phelps, Johnny Verhoevic with us today. Great to have you with us here in the briefing room as well on this very busy Monday. Hope you'll come back tomorrow and join us 3:30 Eastern Time right here on ABC News Live. Download the ABC News app for the latest on all the stories we've talked about today. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.